Democrats are coming together, at least in virtual form, for the 2020 National Convention this week, rallying around the party, their platform, and their presidential ticket. Then next week, it's the Republicans' turn. But not everyone is towing the party line. Since the early days of the last election cycle, some prominent Republicans have been railing against the Trumpification of the GOP. Among them is longtime strategist Stuart Stevens, who in his new book, It Was All a Lie, How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump, argues, quote, Trump isn't an aberration of the Republican Party. He is the Republican Party in a purified form. Stuart Stevens has worked on campaigns for president of George W. Bush, Mitt Romney, and plenty of other Republican governors and senators in between. He's now a senior advisor for the Lincoln Project. That's the group of Republicans working to defeat Trump in November. Stuart, thanks so much for joining us. Congratulations on the book.
Thanks, bud. It's great to be here, man.
So if after your guy Romney had lost in 2012, I had been sitting down with you and said a Putin romancing, deficit exploding, credibly accused sexually assaulting, science denying Republican is going to be the next president of the United States, what would you have said to me?
Yeah, well, I would have asked to have some of what you are having. You know, I never would have thought it possible. You know, you go back to 2016, a lot of people were wrong about Donald Trump, but it's just really hard to find somebody who was more wrong than me. I didn't think he'd win the nomination. I didn't think he'd win the general. And I realized in retrospect, a lot of that was that I just didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to believe that this party that I'd worked in and tried to help build in a modern form would support a guy who was a failed casino owner who talked in public about dating his daughter. I just didn't think it would happen.
So, and the reason you were so wrong was, quote, to quote your title, it was all a lie. You contend in your book that you believed that the Republicans through the years actually believed in moral character and fiscal responsibility and keeping Russia in check. But that isn't, Trump didn't run as all the things I described a minute ago. He may have evolved into those things. So how do you argue that the Republicans betrayed their true beliefs in November 4 years ago?
Well, look, I think that, you know, if you go back to the dark old ages, say 4 years ago, 90% of Republicans would have agreed that the party disagreed on certain issues. The party was based on certain principles. So what were those? Character counts, personal responsibility is key, strong on Russia, fiscal sanity, like you were saying, the deficit matters, free trade, very pro-legal immigration. Ronald Reagan announced in front of the Statue of Liberty, signed a bill that made everybody in the country before 1983 legal. So it's not that we've like drifted away from those, but Trump is actively in the party now, is actively against those. So, you know, where I got here is I just sort of asked myself a fundamental question. How do you abandon deeply held beliefs in a few years? And I think the answer is you don't. It just means you didn't deeply hold them.
Well, then I'll ask you another fundamental question. While a bunch of Republican strategists like you have gotten it, many GOP elected officials, the vast majority, have not. One of my favorite lines in your book is, few Republicans challenge Trump on his conspiracy obsessions, treating him like an addled senior citizen who calls his congressman's office demanding to know why the CIA is talking to him through his dentures. Well, one former client of yours did challenge him at the most difficult of times. Here's Mitt Romney right before he voted to remove the president of the United States.
In the last several weeks, I've received numerous calls and texts. Many demanded in their words that I stand with the team. But my promise before God to apply impartial justice required that I put my personal feelings and political biases aside. With my vote, I will tell my children and their children that I did my duty to the best of my ability, believing that my country expected it of me.
You know, I know this is naive, but most of his colleagues have children, and they have children as well. Impeachment and removal, that's as big as it gets. The smaller things. Why do they not have the you-know-whats to challenge this guy on virtually anything, Stuart?
I don't understand it, so let's preface it with that. But I think you have to come to the conclusion that they believe that what they get out of Trump being president is worth the cost of Trump being president.
What's that?
Well, accepting that we have a racist as president, accepting that character doesn't count, accepting the fact that the Republican Party now is really openly a white grievance party. So you have to accept all those things. So what do you get? Maybe you get a tax cut for, lowering the marginal rates for corporations. Maybe you get a so-called conservative judge. I think it's just a process of trying to bargain against yourself and what you know to be right. It's a classic Faustian bargain. And what people forget is Mephistopheles not only takes your soul, but he never delivers. And Trump hasn't delivered.
You mentioned the racism, and obviously this party has ignored diversity forever, overtly hostile to it in 2016. I wasn't aware till I read your book. Eisenhower got 39% of the black vote. Nixon even 32%. It wasn't until Goldwater, and you mentioned, was against the Civil Rights Act. But I live in a majority-minority city. We're not that far away from a majority-minority country. There's no future for a party that doesn't believe in any of that and doesn't even pretend they believe in that. So what happens to the Republican Party post-Trump?
I think it's clear. Look at California. California went from being a beating heart and soul of the Republican Party, the electoral citadel, to the Republican Party's in third place. It's a pretty good history of what happens in California eventually happens across the country. I came across this stat and it just blew my mind. Of Americans 15 years of age and under, the majority are non-white. So, I think the odds they're going to turn 18 and remain non-white is looking really good. And that's really sort of a death sentence for the Republican Party, like you're saying, unless it changes, and the party has no desire to change.
Well, when you say it has no desire to change, in the last chapter or your afterword, or I don't know what it's called, the last chapter of the book, you mentioned 3 Republican governors who were wildly popular in very, very blue states. Vermont was Scott, Hogan in Maryland, and obviously Charlie Baker, where I'm sitting here in Massachusetts. Is there any place for anybody like any of those 3 guys in the Republican Party?
No, not on a national level. And look, I love those guys. I work for all 3 of them. If the Republican Party really wanted to operate like a business, they look at these guys and say, look, they're selling our product in the hardest market. What can we learn from them? Instead, they just kind of treat them with benign neglect. But I'll tell you something really telling to me, Jim. As popular as those governors are, they can't pick their own state party chairman. I mean, because you know politics, how impossible that was to imagine just a few years ago. But it just shows how far Trumpism has become ingrained in the party and how comfortable the party is with Trumpism. So even when you have these wildly popular guys, they can't pick their chairman. There's no future for that on a national level.
Stuart, I've been watching you on television for years, and while your politics may not be my politics, I've always respected your understanding of politics. Do you go to bed at night saying to yourself, how could I have been so wrong about the party that I spent my life working in? Yeah,
pretty much. That's why I wrote the book. Not a fun book, not a fun book to write. I'd much rather I could be at this stage in my life. I helped elect Republicans in over half the country. I worked on 5 presidentials and look back and say, okay, this was, we all play to the dark side too much, but the party evolved and changed and became what I'd hoped it would become. But I can't. The party went in the other direction. I mean, one of the things I talk about in the book, if you go back and you read George Bush's acceptance speech given almost exactly 20 years ago in Philadelphia, it reads like a document from a lost civilization. I mean, it's like something the Mayans left and, you stumbled across. You just can't believe it's the same party. All this talk about humility and service and compassion. I mean, that message couldn't win 10% in a Republican primary nationally now. We saw this dark side. It was obvious. But a lot of us thought it was a recessive gene and that there was sort of an inevitability to the party growing and changing. We were wrong.
Hey, we need a good Mayan candidate, actually, it sounds like. We only have 30 seconds left. You didn't think Trump could get elected in 2016. Could he get elected in 2020 despite the polls we see, including one this morning where he's down in double digits?
Yeah, sure. Look, here's a little chilling fact. We had campaign finance reform where both candidates got the same money from 1976 to 2008. Under that system, Carter lost and Bush lost. It helped level the playing field. Now we don't. So it's a fair question to ask, when was the last incumbent president who was not in the federal funding system to lose? And that was Herbert Hoover. And he had a bad year. So, yeah, I'll always have to be with the incumbent president in our system.
Well, this guy's had a bad year, too. But if you want to improve your year, I'd read the book. It's a great read, Stuart Stevens. It's good to have you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks for taking the time, man. Really appreciate it.
The book again, It Was All a Lie, How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump.